Welcome to Pollinator Week, everybody. We are so excited to have our day 2 of our virtual program series happening now live on Facebook. I hope that you are able to access the full schedule of events in our Facebook events section. But just in case you're not clicking around Facebook, I want to provide you with a look at our website, www.savedunes.org, where in our news section, if you click on news, you'll see we have a Pollinator Week virtual presentation series. And in here we have the full schedule of events. So yesterday was an incredibly exciting release of our brand new Living in the Dunes, a homeowner's guide to pollinator garden landscaping in Indiana's coastal communities. We had so much fun sharing that with all of you. And for the remainder of the week, we're bringing the guide to life with special presentations from some of our expert committee members. And so here we are today on Tuesday, June 22nd, where we're going to talk about developing pollinator habitat in your home garden. We're featuring a tour of Carl Ackermann's native garden in Munster, Indiana, and are also welcoming Eric Bird to the stage to share the Bringing Nature Home Award that they offer to celebrate folks that are doing the hard work to create native gardens in their landscapes. For the rest of the week, we have some exciting programs coming up. Tomorrow, 2 of our pollinator experts will provide presentations on native bees and the Lepidoptera, or the butterflies and the moths. On Thursday, we've got a wonderful presentation on pollinator art, photography, and culture. This is going to feature a presentation from Susan Kurt on how to take incredible pictures of tiny insects on flowers. A discussion on how Barb Labus is able to put these beautiful illustrations of native plants and pollinators together. And our friend and colleague Joel Perez from the Nature Conservancy, who will discuss the cultural connections of the East Chicago community to the monarch butterfly at their festival that they hold every September. And then we're wrapping it up on Friday with this incredible landscape scale pollinator habitat conservation program that Katie Hobgood from Save the Dunes, Desi Robertson from the park, Eric Bird of Shirley, Hines, Steve Barker of NIPSCO are all working together on to restore pollinator habitat at the landscape scale. And they're going to bring it home to help you understand how all the native gardening that you're doing is actually conservation work. You're actually working in collaboration with these conservation experts and increasing connectivity at the landscape scale. So very exciting stuff. I also wanted to highlight that we want you to have a copy of our guide. You can click on this button on our website to sign up to receive a copy. We will email you as soon as it comes out so you can download it and start to use the resources we've put together. So please do click on that button on our website, or I believe, Katie, thumbs up if you got that in the Facebook chat. Excellent. Thank you so much, Katie. So yes, please sign up to receive a copy of our guide. Also, we absolutely want to make sure that the whole world knows that NIPSCO and the NiSource Charitable Foundation provided the funding that enables us to spread the word about pollinators during Pollinator Week, to bring our guide to life, to highlight all our incredible partners. So a huge thank you for that support. We also want to highlight the support from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the Indiana Department of Natural Resources Lake Michigan Coastal Program for funding the production of our new Pollinator Garden Landscaping Guide. We had matching support for that grant come through from BP, the McDougall Family Foundation, NIPSCO, and the Unity Foundation. Thank you all for your generous support. The Great Lakes Restoration Initiative is helping us to get the word out beyond the scope of the production of the guide, to print more of the guide. So thank you. And so I'm going to stop sharing and bring it back to this gallery view. We have Carl Ackerman on stage virtually today through a presentation, not a presentation, a video that we took at his native garden a couple weeks ago. And so Carl couldn't be with us tonight, but we're really thrilled to share with you the video that we put together. And I just wanted to let everybody know that video editing is not easy, and I'm incredibly thankful for the hard work of our very own Katie Hobgood for helping to edit these videos and really create a polished product. So I hope you're going to enjoy our video. It lasts for about 15 minutes. And then following that, I will introduce our next speaker, Eric Bird, and he will finish us off with his presentation. So we're excited for that too. Before I launch into the video, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Carl. So Carl Ackerman grew up on the south side of Chicago. His interest in gardening was born many years ago out of the legacy of his parents being the president of their local garden club, and that was in Riverdale, Illinois. So Carl participated then by making flower arrangements and winning blue ribbon contests. So maybe this is sparking some like, oh, I think I can relate to that. Well, Carl went on to become the national treasurer for the Wild Ones, which is a native plant organization. And he serves on their finance committee. He's also the treasurer of the Gibson Woods chapter of Wild Ones, which many people know have a fantastic native plant sale in the springtime. The Wild Ones promotes environmentally sound landscaping practices to encourage biodiversity through the preservation, restoration, and establishment of native plant communities. Wild Ones is a nonprofit, environmental, educational, and advocacy organization with over 5,000 members in 18 states, including Indiana. Together with his team, Carl has relationship with schools, garden clubs, businesses, Shirley Hines Land Trust, Save the Dunes, the Nature Conservancy, Master Gardeners, and a lot more. He's quoted as saying, all the projects that we are working on together with our regular speaking engagements and fundraising result in growing membership and a healthy chapter. So we were beyond delighted to have Carl agree to invite us into his fabulous garden for a first-hand tour. So I am going to launch into that video now, and I hope that you will enjoy.
We're here today with Carl Ackerman of Wild Ones to explore his native plant butterfly garden, which really is habitat for all kinds of marvelous wildlife. So we're here in Munster, Indiana, on a typical block that becomes incredible when suddenly there is an explosion of native plants, habitat, and all kinds of nature connections.
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. I'm really honored and humbled, but and to be part of this project, to rolling out the Pollinator Guide. It's been a lot of fun, and it's a little bit of work.
It's very exciting.
We're going to start in the front, and you can see some things are blooming now. This is a native coreopsis. Yesterday I did see a monarch nectaring on it, and you can also see the milkweed that's amongst it. There's also quite a bit of black-eyed Susan, brown-eyed Susan that's yet to bloom. Here we can see a lupine that's doing really well here.
Yeah.
That's a couple years old, and we do have some native yarrow. One of the themes that I go for is diversity, and also just kind of letting things show up where they show up, and not trying to fight it, but just go with it. We do have hyssop, some hystrix, a grass, the bottlebrush grass, some Queen of the Prairie is mixed in here, some rattlesnake master, but yeah, there's some obedient plants in here. Of course, the coneflowers are just starting to bloom now.
Yeah.
Of course, that's a nice fun color texture. Of course, there's little bits between driveways. So what do you do with it? You could, just plant lawn here. I started planting sunflowers here, and then the sunflowers just started to reseed themselves. Of course, sunflowers, they're very charismatic, and the pollinators, really love them. So this gets to be a real pollinator hotbed, around 4th of July or so, between the monarda and the liatris and the sunflowers.
All the milkweed.
Yeah.
And now we're headed to the back of this natural oasis.
So you immediately, here's a button bush. So this is more of a wet area. I learned that it was a wet area. Of course, I didn't know it when I started planting things here. And so it's just one of the things I learned. So start planting things for wet. Queen of the prairie, likes the wet. The primrose, native primrose. There's some sweetgrass down here. And goat's beard, some white turtle head. You pan along the fence here. This used to be all lawn, but over several years I wanted to create more of a thicket. For habitat, for cover. And of course, the birds like it, but also the pollinators, they need cover as well. I used to think I was here and my garden was there. But now, wherever I go, I'm just amongst my garden. I'm part of the garden. So it's just a really amazing feeling that, I share the garden, with all the critters, with the pollinators. It's a shared experience. I'm not here in the gardens over there. It's amongst us. But some native larkspur. We do have some goldenrod. There's some ironweed here. This was one of the first gardens that I planted. I did understand that I'd open the book in the flower book, and I would see that the butterflies like this, bees like this, and this was my first guide before I learned about habitat, before I learned about native plants. And then, of course, that was kind of a stepping stone. Once I learned about the relationship between native plants and pollinators, that was one big giant leap. Then the next leap, I would say, for me, was then to learn what habitat was. Mm-hmm. And the habitat, of course, is food, water, shelter, and a place to rear their young. Some of my carnivorous plants. So a little story. Of course, I have 3 daughters, and my middle daughter, I think she was in 3rd or 4th grade. We're learning about Indiana and the geography and things. And I'm reading her book to her, and I see that the Indiana Dunes is home to some carnivorous plants. I thought, holy cow, I got to get some of those. And of course, amongst it, now we do have our prickly pear, and that's real popular at the dunes as well. These are Canada lilies. I really inspired by them. They're about 15 years old now. But it took about 4 or 5 years for them to bloom. We do have a Virginia creeper up here and a grapevine. Yeah, you can see the mayaples. We got some wild ginger under there. This is a Virginia snake root.
Let's head over and check out this patch of Monarda.
Yeah, we can see it's starting to bloom here.
That's the first Monarda petal I've seen this year.
It's starting to bloom.
It will be an absolute magnet for the bees.
Yeah, the bees love it. Yeah. Hence the name bee balm.
Bee balm. And you mentioned, Carl, that there's a berm habitat.
Yes, I did learn about habitat to provide cover. And when I was working with the National Wildlife Federation, they recommended a wood pile. But now, I repurpose all the branches I cut, all the yard waste. I don't necessarily create waste anymore. I repurpose it to create this texture here for the critters to live in. So yeah, it's a berm, it's a wood pile, it's habitat. And Jack in the pulpit, you can see the fruits, starting to mature back in here. This is the Salix discolor. Yeah, the Salix discolor, the pussy willow. Again, one of the first things to bloom. It's the dogwood, flowered, now it's bearing fruit. Of course, the pollinators enjoyed it, and now the birds are going to enjoy the seeds toward the end of the year.
And in here we have a surprise.
Yeah, so this is a non-native, but it's a little cherry tree. And again, it's fun, to see these fruits. This is the Stella cherry.
Yeah.
And then I do have Fuji Nagala apple tree.
Oh, and this is a side hobby.
Yeah, my side hobby. I love to propagate plants. We'll either give these away as projects, through the Wild Ones, with our planting projects, or we may end up, selling them, next year in our fundraiser.
Ooh, and now we're arriving at the penstemon.
Penstemon, yeah.
Oh, and it's still in full bloom. Ooh, we've got a bumbler.
There he goes.
We've got a bumbler.
Oh, there's a couple of them over there, yeah. Thrilling moments.
Yeah. Oh, is that indigo? Those are indigo pods already formed too.
Oh yeah. Baptisia australis. Yeah, they just finished blooming. And then there's some more that's in bloom over there.
Oh, there was this fern.
Yeah,
Carl?
so that's Camptonia peregrina. And it is a fern that does like sun, a well-drained soil. And I started out with a couple of plants here. And so this berm was created by a felled oak tree, just covered it with soil and made a berm out of it. And the Camptonia peregrina loves it up here. And the lupines, so these lupines are seeding. You can see they did well back here. That's Baptisia alba.
And we see our bumblebee foraging for pollen. And this, Carl, is another milkweed.
Yeah, it's a green milkweed. So the rabbits, do enjoy eating it. So I did put a cage around it this year. And part of my strategy is that, hey, if you only plant 10 plants and the rabbits eat 3, it's a bummer. You lose 30%. But if you plant 500 plants and you lose 30, hey, that's okay. But if there's something you really, really want to keep the rabbits from eating, I do cage it. And this is a green milkweed.
Yeah.
And it's, it is flowering this year, of course, you can see.
Yeah.
And I hope, the monarchs find it. So, one of the things I learned from Brenda Gijic was about asters and how they're a native host plant for the checker spot. But of course, and then they're nectar sources for butterflies toward the end of the year. But then, and the bees love them, so it's like a win-win-win. There's some New England aster, some heart-shaped aster. One of the things I also learned was that asters, they will propagate and pop up in other areas. And I used to be of the mind that the kind of the scorched earth approach, if I didn't plant it there, I would just yank it out. Hey, I didn't plant it there, let's just get rid of it. But then I learned, hey, if I don't know, let it grow. And asters are one of those things that they don't bloom toward the end of the year. But if you learn to identify them, that's an aster. You let it grow and it's going to bloom at the end of the year.
It's going to really deliver for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and look at all of the asters. Oh my goodness.
So yeah, we have some microhabitats. We got some shade in the back, some partial shade over here for the asters, and now this area is pretty much a full sun area. So there's some liatris, there's some blue baptisia that's blooming over here.
I see pollinators on that baptisia.
There's some obedient plant here, some goldenrod, before towards the end of the year. There's some butterfly milkweed over here.
Carl, would you mind sharing with folks what's going on here with your straw bales?
Yeah, so actually this was my wife's idea, Peggy. But we're growing things in straw bales. It keeps it off the ground. I think it helps, keep it away from rabbits' reach, if you will. I do started things in straw bales. You can seed the straw bale with, I use my fish emulsion stuff to add nutrients. And then, we planted some peppers. The tomatoes do really well. Some things, of course, didn't do so well, like beans and things, but we found the tomatoes and the peppers do really well in the straw bales. These are the pussy toes. It's a host plant for the American lady butterfly.
And you see caterpillars and butterflies through here?
Yes, yeah. It's funny how we're amazing. If you plant it, they will come. And you see the American lady, purposefully land on it. And then I go over and lift up the leaf, and boom, there's some eggs.
There's some eggs.
And then, I also see the caterpillars as well.
And so I also see another host plant in here.
The violets.
The violets. They're beautiful flowers in the springtime and wonderful food for the fritillaries.
For fritillaries, yeah.
Is this ginger?
Yes, this is the native ginger.
That's our native ginger.
And I did dig up some roots this spring and washed them off, and it does taste like ginger. Hence the name. We can see the ferns. There's cinnamon fern, ostrich fern, May apples, golden ragwort that's done blooming. But yeah, if you're a toad, hey, I want toads to show up in my yard. Actually, we do have toads. I do hear them once in a while.
We have a duck egg here.
Yeah, Louise and Larry, they do come every year, and they do their mating. And we have had ducks nest in our grasses here. And then she marches them off after 4 or 5 hours. So a water feature. Of course, this is a very elaborate water feature, but even just having a bird bath, one of the 4 essential elements: food, water, shelter, and a place to rear their young. Some of the pollinators, need water, of course, for their metabolism, but they also need water to, build their nests. It's not just entertainment, but it's like, again, sharing our backyard with the ducks and the birds and, of course, the pollinators.
What an incredible adventure your garden is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a place for one or two flowers, it's a place for habitat.
And I guess in closing, it is an adventure, and it's a process. Start small. We've been here almost 20 years, and I started planting 20 years ago, and it takes years, believe me. Of course, I planted things early on when I saw in a book that a hummingbird or a bee would like this plant, but then I discovered what native plants are and the association of our insects with native plants, and then I learned about what habitat was. And it just expanded my mind, and the garden. But now I feel like I'm among the habitat. The bees and the butterflies are among the habitat, and we share it. So I'm part of the habitat, they're part of the habitat, and we share these plants, and it's just so exciting.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your incredible garden with us today.
Yeah, thank you.
And for lending your expertise for the creation of our new pollinator habitat landscaping guide.
Yeah, it's an honor. It's humbling.
It's mutual. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you.
Now, wasn't that extraordinary? I really felt like I was in the habitat too. I was amongst the habitat. I was with the plants, with the wildlife. The number of birds that I heard while visiting Carl's garden was, I couldn't keep count. And you may have heard in the background that quintessential summer sound of the lawnmower and the weed whacker. And so just a funny little story. Carl gave me a tour of the whole garden before we did the video, just so we could have some ideas in place. And when we went back out to the front and were ready to start filming, a bunch of lawnmowers fired up across the street and weed whackers. And I ran across the street and I begged them. I said, please, would you mind going to starting on the other side? And graciously, they were happy to oblige. But what a stark difference in management of a landscape. With native plants, you have the opportunity to support pollinators who are in steep decline right now, support your birds, support your wildlife. And you're also cutting back on all of those lawn maintenance expenses. So, mowing a lawn for me on a blistering hot summer day is not my favorite activity. I'm really not sure why it's anyone's favorite activity. But, with the native garden, the more native plants that you put in, the less of that you have to do. And what an extraordinary space that was. I hope that we will have an opportunity to revisit Carl's garden in a couple of weeks' time when more of the plants are in full bloom. If that happens, please do check out the video that we create or the pictures that we post. I think you'll be blown away by, especially, that huge patch of asters. If we get pictures of that in the fall, it's gonna amaze you. It's a pollinator magnet and it's stunning in its beauty. So thank you for tuning in for that presentation. And now I am so happy to introduce my friend and colleague, Eric Bird of Shirley Hines Land Trust. Eric is a steadfast supporter of everything conservation in Northwest Indiana, and I know that none of us could do it without him. Eric Bird, he's the Stewardship Director of Shirley Hines Land Trust, where he manages the Stewardship program and staff. He has been with the organization for over 6 years. He has more than 10 years of experience in ecological stewardship and restoration. He holds a master's in biological sciences from Purdue University. And additionally, he holds a minor in environmental sciences and an AS in interdisciplinary agricultural studies. What an asset he is to our region. Eric has substantial experience with ecological restoration of natural areas and native gardening in his own wild yard. So with that, I am going to hand it over to you, Eric, to go ahead and share your screen and take it away.
Well, thank you. It's always a little awkward to hear it all read out loud, your your qualifications and whatnot. Um, so thank you, and I'm going to share my screen and give a little presentation about our Bringing Nature Home Award and how your garden makes a difference. If you've heard this before, bear with me. I'll try to make it exciting, but I also encourage you, if you have questions. People usually like to ask questions about these things. And uh, well, a little bit later on in the slideshow, I'll show some pictures and things of my own native garden and one of our coworkers who has a native garden. Last year, I believe it was last year, was the first time we allowed staff and board members to get a Bringing Nature Home recognition. So we were all super excited about that because we hadn't had the opportunity to do it before. But it's really not a competition, more of a recognition, and it's supposed to recognize your hard work and encourage other people to do this as well. So without further ado, I'll try to move through this. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do with Shirley Hines Land Trust and talk about why bringing nature home, putting native plants in your landscape is so important to the conservation work that we're all trying to accomplish together. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the myths that come along with native gardens, sort of the barriers that people think why they don't want to do it, and try to dispel a little bit of that. And then talk about some of the key elements you want to think about when you're starting to incorporate these in your landscape. And I will harken back to what Carl was saying, that it takes years, and don't get discouraged, and take it a little bit at a time. And I promise you that it's very addictive, and you will love it, and you'll continue to do it. You'll learn along the way. So I'm the stewardship director for Shirley Hines Land Trust. We are a nationally accredited land trust. That means that we basically have good management practices. We manage over 2,700 acres. We preserve those acres through conservation easements or through ownership. A lot of our nature preserves are open to the public. So all the green dots are places that have an area you can park and a trail you can visit. So we want to not only preserve nature and restore it, but engage people with nature. We want you to get out there and experience nature, and not just be like Carl said, this is me here and that's nature over there, but be out in it and feel all the joy that comes along with that. So I just kind of showed you a map of where all our little nature preserves are, but the reason for you planting natives in your yard, one of the big reasons is that we obviously have a lot of habitat fragmentation, and a lot of species can't move very easily, right? We know that birds can fly and they can kind of get from patch to patch. We know that the monarchs make a huge journey across the country, and some of those species are really able to move long distances, but there are a lot of insects and small things. Think about all the turtles you saved that are crossing the road. They have a lot of trouble going from one spot to the next. Think about the tiny little leafhoppers and the small bugs. You ever flipped over a rock and you see all these little bugs under there? Those things can't travel very far, and some of them are very dependent on certain habitat types and certain very specific native plants, just like the monarch is dependent on the milkweed. Some of these insects and smaller animals are very dependent on a specific native plant. They're not generalist, and they need that. So if they're fragmented and they can't move to another place, they're locked into this island, and you have sort of an island ecology. So new species or new individuals of that species, it's very hard for them to move into there. And the ones that are there, it's very hard for them to move out of there. So that leads to lower diversity because new species can't come in and create a food web or a food chain that is needed for that ecosystem to function. You see a lot of extinction. You see loss of species. There's also a sort of a barrier to the genetic diversity too, right? So you have this isolated gene pool, and there's not new genetics coming into it and new individuals coming in to breed and strengthen that gene pool. So this can lead to a loss of species. So the smaller your fragment patch, generally has less biodiversity and just less number of species. So species richness would be the other sort of metric. So back to the map of all our nature preserves. So in this isn't just Shirley Hines Nature Preserves, this is some of the protected lands in that same landscape. And you can tell that, you know, we have the Indiana Dunes National Park up there as one of our larger protected areas. And there are patches where a lot of partners like Save the Dunes and Shirley Hines and DNR and the Park Service and other land trusts, the Nature Conservancy have worked together. So you see a lot of different colors in some areas. That's because there's different ownership to try and create that connectivity. But there are places in between where people live and people farm, and there are businesses. There's our hospitals and our schools and things like that that are always going to be that, right? They're not going to be a nature preserve. And so when you put native plants into your garden, or a business does it, or a municipality does it, that's helping form a corridor of connectivity so that some of these species, they can bounce, right? They can hop from island to island and get from one big area to another. And you're really helping them migrate in and out and improve biodiversity overall, not just in your yard, but over the entire region. So we just use this example. This is one of our very nice nature preserves called the J. Timothy Ritchie Nature Preserve. It's in Chesterton. And just the map of it, this is the trail and this is the nature preserve. It's I want to say it's a little over 40 acres, but everything around it is homes, right? And I'm not going to get rid of those homes. There's no chance the land trust is going to buy up everybody's house and knock it down and turn it into forest. That's not what we're here for, right? But if everybody in those homes plants natives in their yard that replicate that forested area, then this forest area could double in size, triple in size, right? Become connected to another forested area. So it's very important that everybody does their part. So again, habitat connectivity is a good reason to plant natives. Lots of times rivers and streams act as these corridors because nobody wants to build in the floodplain, right? So they form these long stretches. And we want to try to help reestablish the populations that have been reduced or eliminated due to disturbance. Another thing where you'll see things like this, corridors like this, tend to be rights of way, like railroad corridors or power line corridors. So we'll talk a little bit about that on Friday with our landscape level pollinator restoration projects. NIPSCO owns a lot of land that is like this, that forms connections between our nature preserves and allows wildlife to move back and forth. So Shirley Hines Land Trust does this recognition program called Bringing Nature Home, and it is named after a Douglas Tallamay book. He's an ecologist that writes a lot of books and is a huge proponent of planting natives in your landscape. And right now he's part of a big project called the Backyard National Park, I believe it's called, something like that. And you can go on there and add your native garden to the map. And the goal is that if we all did this, right, we don't need these big protected areas anymore if everywhere around us is a native landscape, right, is a protected area. So we can form this nationwide national park. So I encourage you to check that out and put your garden on the map. I also encourage you to apply for the Bring Nature Home recognition, put a sign in your yard, and I'll talk a little bit about why that's important. So not just homeowners, but businesses, schools. You ever pull up to like a drive-through or go to a shopping center and they just have the scraggliest, just worst landscape ever that nobody takes care of, and the bottom is rocks and it's just got a few bushes in there, and you're like, why would they ever even do this, right? You can plant these natives and you can look at someone like Carl's yard, and what Victoria was just saying with like mowing your lawn and things, like the more wild you allow it to become, the less maintenance it is. And you can really like grow this stuff and just let it go. So this is the Dorothy Buell Memorial Visitor Center. So it's the Visitor Center for the Indiana Dunes National Park and State Park. And they have these beautiful native gardens. A lot of their plants are labeled, and they have a rain garden there. So they're doing a lot to help ecosystem function and form connectivity. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the myths about native gardens. So these are some of the reasons where people will be like, well, I'm not sure if that's like for me. You know, I like my hostas and things, and that's nice and neat and such. So one of the things is people often think like native gardens are this big, messy, weedy, uncontrollable thing. And if anybody's ever tried to establish a native garden, you have had somebody come up and say, why don't you pull those weeds, or why aren't you cutting that stuff, right? It just looks so messy. And usually the anecdotes I hear is that's the first couple of years. And then like 2 or 3 years down the road, when things are really blooming and stuff's really happening, they come back and they're like, wow, that's beautiful. Like, how do I do it? Or I didn't know that that's what you were trying to do. But they don't have to, you don't have to plant a prairie. You don't have to restore a forest in order to do this. They can still be neat in blocks, very manicured, very, you know, pathways, the sort of typical garden look, but just using natives so that you're supporting our local pollinators and our local wildlife. And you need a lot of space, right? People think, oh, I need 20 acres, or I'm going to plant this 3-acre prairie. I've had so many people call me and say, I've got 10 acres in my backyard and I want to turn it into prairie. And I got a little tractor and I think I can do this. So my advice to you is to start small, number one. And number two, you don't need that. So you saw some of that in Carl's, and I believe actually this picture here is from Carl's garden, and he got one of the Bring Nature Home awards. But even this, it's just a couple of grasses, right? And those grasses might provide some foraging or some habitat for some birds or some insects to live. And actually, when I lived in an area where we had a very small area of yard, sometimes just like not mowing a patch. So if you haven't done a native garden or anything, I encourage you to first take something the size of like a coffee table and just stop mowing it, see what grows, see what flowers. Have you ever not mowed your grass and just seen what the seed heads look like, you know? And when you do that, you will see this world of life come, you know, just come to life before your eyes. You'll see all these little insects and little ants and little pollinators and things that are going to use that. And they can't live in that mowed, sterile landscape. So you don't need a lot of space. It can be the smallest thing. You can do it in pots on a balcony. And then there's this sort of purist form where everything has to be native and no cultivars and no annuals and things like that. And that doesn't have to be. If you like your hostas, keep your hostas, you know. Every year I do plant things like impatiens because I have a lot of shade, right? And like I said, it takes years. So we've been in our house for 3 years, but I like to have that color all year long. And the pollinators will nectar off of those flowers too. They don't discriminate against flowers and nectar. But you want to have some natives. Like I said, those support some very specific native insects and native pollinators, native wildlife. They need some of those things, but it's okay to have your annuals and have your hanging baskets and those things too, because we all like color all summer. Your neighbors won't like it. You're not allowed to do it. You have an HOA, right? Those kinds of reasons to not get into it. And this is not a native garden. I know you can see the little Monarch Gardens LLC thing. I had found this on the internet, but I just thought it was just the perfect example. This person has this yard in this green urban landscape. And to me, I look at it and I'm like, that's the backyard I want to sit in, right? It's beautiful. And I bet in the beginning, a lot of people were like, why are you not mowing your lawn? And now I bet a lot of people are like, can I come visit your backyard? You know, it takes time to change those attitudes about what your yard is supposed to look like, that your yard has to look like your neighbors. Take it slow, change people's mind, show them that why this works and why you like it and why it's important. It's important if you're planting those natives, not just to do it for yourself, but to do it for the natural world around you, and try to be a good advocate of it as well and say, you know, this is a good thing. I'm not just not mowing my lawn. I'm making habitat here for the insects and birds. So understanding your space, and this isn't a perfect ecosystem map. This is sort of, we group together our nature preserves by that they all have the general similar habitat types, similar ecosystems. But in the pollinator guide, there is a map like that with all the different habitat types. So it's really good to know where you live. If you live in the dunes, right, you're going to use the dunes pollinator guide or the living in the dunes native plant guide. But if you're in like the dune and swale area, or you're on the Valparaiso Moraine, it's good to go visit some parks around you, visit some preserves, get a feel for what natives are there, because the most low maintenance that your native garden can be is one that belongs there, right? So you have a particular soil type that might be rocky because it's from the glacial moraine and you have these moraine soils, or maybe it's really sandy and it's going to be very well drained and very low nutrients and that sort of thing. So the things from, you know, the eastern forest aren't going to like to grow on your sand dune that's blasted in the sun, right? Maybe you're in a prairie area. You can artificially recreate all of those habitats based on, hey, this is a sunny, wet spot, so I'm going to make, you know, a wet prairie planting over here. You can do that as well. But you're providing a lot more support by being like, I live in a very forested area, so I'm going to have a forested woodland garden that has a lot of these natives. And again, forming that connectivity between the two forested areas. What kind of soil types, whether you have sun and shade, wet or dry, all those are just basic gardening things, right? If you garden at all, you're looking at those kinds of things. And the pollinator guide helps walk you through that, of what kind of plants would be good in that sense. And what do you want to achieve? What do you already have? And what's missing? So what do you want to achieve? Maybe you're like, I want butterflies, and there are lots of plants that will really attract the butterflies, support the butterflies. Maybe you're like, I love birds and bird watching, right? In that case, you might want some bird houses. You're going to want a bird bath, right? You're going to want bird feeders and things like that, places where the birds can make their nests, you know, places where they can feel safe from predators, all that kind of stuff. So you can go in a direction, or you can just say, I want native habitat that has it all, right? But maybe you want to manage for snakes, or maybe you just really like spiders, right? And there are things you can do to help support that particular thing that you have an interest in. What's there now? I heard Carl say something like, if you don't know, let it grow. I see all the time on social media, people post these things with like a little plant sprouting out of the ground. It's got like 2 leaves on it, and they're like, what is this? Can anybody identify this, you know? The most fun part to me is to like watch that thing all year and be like, oh, it's got a flower on it. Now I know what it is, you know? If you don't know, just let it grow and watch that and see. Know your invasives and try to get rid of those, of course, but all that stuff's going to take a long time. You can find so much that comes up just from not mowing it and cutting it down, not pulling it out. And, you know, there is sort of a, you know, this native is this big, beautiful cardinal flower with red flowers, and I want it in my garden. And then there's other things where people are like, this is a weed. And I'm like, no, that, you know, that's a little native thing too. It's a little native clover. It's a little native violet, you know, and it's a little native aster or goldenrod or something. And a lot of those things are probably already there, especially if you live near more of a natural area. And a lot of things want to be there first. So some of those species that are more weedy, we would call those ruderal species or pioneer species. And they come in first and they sort of establish some roots and they hold that soil in, and it allows the other things to come in. So it can be supportive, almost like, think of like a cover crop, right? Until you've got other stuff in there, just let those little weedy things grow. Plan your area well, you know, look at an aerial photo, do a drawing, do that typical landscape thing. But think about yourself too and your family and how you use that space. I'm not personally one that needs a big lawn and stuff like that, but maybe you have little kids and you have a playground set, you know, and you need a space for them to be able to like swing on the swings or something like that. Or maybe you're your son is in soccer and he needs a place where he can kick the soccer ball, right? And you can't exactly have a backyard just like Carl's. Um, Maybe you want a swimming pool, or maybe you need a place where you barbecue and entertain guests, right? Where are you going to put that sort of patio area? Um, but I also think about, like, what windows do you look out? My wife and I sit in our kitchen and we always are looking out our kitchen window. That's where we have our bird feeders. That's where all our native plants are. You know, we can see it year round in the wintertime and everything. What are the wildlife needs? Um, oh, well, what do you see and when do you see it? Is just sort of like a what kind of things are already blooming and what's missing kind of thing. What are the wildlife needs? Carl made a very good point. Oftentimes when people do native gardens, they forget about things like water. You need a water source there, and that will bring so many more things to your yard. But also like that living area. So I like to keep mine a little messy. I like to have those wood piles and things. That's how you help things overwinter, have some place to hide, have some place to feel safe, build their home. Bloom times is really important. You don't want to pack your entire space with everything that blooms in June, and then in August, there's just nothing there for the pollinators, right? So you want to think about, I want some things in spring, some things in early summer, midsummer, late summer, fall, all the way to winter. You want some things that will stand in the winter and form some structure that'll leave some messiness, you know, all that kind of stuff. Don't plow it all down in the winter. It looks so much better to not do that. Vertical space and structure, you know, you don't want your whole garden to be 2 foot tall. Maybe you want a shrub over here or a tree over there, and that vertical space, you know, think about planting up as well, that it's not just your square footage there. Secret spaces is something I learned from Nathaniel Pilla when he gave a presentation. It's a very key sort of landscape element in our sort of traditional European landscaped gardens. The idea is that it adds some mystery and it adds some adventure to say, I don't know what's around that corner, right? So that's why garden pathways curve and go different ways. Maybe there's a fence there, maybe there's a bush, and behind the bush, there's this whole other garden that you couldn't see when you first walked out the door. And those things make your space feel a lot bigger. And it just makes it so much more enjoyable to have these secret spaces. So back to reality, what can you actually do with your yard and the size that you have? And do bite-sized chunks. So do a little bit at a time and grow that out. And I like to say, save a spot. So you saw all those plants that Carl had. I go to the Gibson Woods Wild One native plant sale and buy plants almost every year, right? I can be good at just packing it all in there and being like, oh no, now where am I going to put this Monarda, right? So save some places and some spaces in your shade, in your sun, in your wet, in your dry, so that when you find that super cool native that you didn't know, like the carnivorous plant, you're like, oh, I'm going to make a little carnivorous plant garden there. It's okay to transition and change things and you know, have empty spaces too. So this is my backyard, and this is a terrible picture of me trying to use my smartwatch to take a picture of us with our Bringing Nature Home sign. But it sort of captures a lot of good things in the yard. So behind my yard is a dune, and there's a few large oak trees and some other trees sort of behind our fenced area. But there's smaller sassafras, and I don't want those to grow terribly big, but I let them grow for a while. I maybe take out the biggest one and let some smaller ones grow up, because they're a really great source for some things that are sort of dependent on there. The flowers, like Carl was saying, they provide nectar, but then they also provide seed and food for the birds. We obviously have a bird feeder back here. The bird bath provides some water. And then these things in the front here are not by accident. I often leave little leaf piles with little sticks and stuff, you know, just things that I scraped up from the areas where we walk or we barbecue and stuff, and just leave that little pile. And you go like flip that over and see like tons of bugs in there. And those bugs bring the other birds that like to be like ground feeders. So things like towhees, juncos like to be on the ground, right? There's a few birds that like to scratch around on the ground and eat bugs. and provides a great habitat for the bugs, the snakes, all sorts of other little things. So my approach is to treat it like a nature preserve. We remove a lot of the invasives. There's a lot of natives there, so we like to be like, oh, look what came up. Look, like I didn't know this was here yet. We try to find the appropriate spaces for the right plants. So this is a shade plant, this is sun, this goes in the front yard, but I purposefully leave it messy. And I swear, for a good year, I think my neighbors just thought my lawnmower was broken. But I like to leave those little piles and things. They bring so much more diversity. So this was an area that when we first moved in, this to the left was an area that was covered. Well, there were some trees that were growing really close to the house, just kind of weedy things. And there were some weedy trees. Spindle tree was the invasive one. But it was covered in vines, English ivy, and like winter creeper. There was a lot of Oriental bittersweet, and we've just sort of cleared that out. And then there's these little plants around there, so we're planting plants in there. But in the spring, there's lots of trillium that just came up. There's other things that came up, and I left my log pile. I leave some of the leaves and stuff. It's a great ground cover. And then the bare soil spots are also important. So those are important for some of the bees and things that need some place to go burrow and live in the winter. And then I was saying, how do you use your space? This is one of my favorite spaces, is 2 trees with a hammock. And this is my view above. This is what I'm looking at when I'm laying in that space. So like I said, my kitchen, I look out the kitchen window. This is what I'm looking at when I'm sitting on my front porch. This is what I'm looking at when I'm sitting in my hammock. There are good things and bad things in here, so we're still continuously working on it, forever and ever, probably. This is some of the highlights. My backyard is a dune, and it's somewhat of a forested dune. So throughout here, a lot of things have come up. It was covered a lot in English ivy. I keep saying that I pulled a lot of English ivy. My wife pulled a lot of English ivy. I help. But a lot of things just came up naturally in there. So there's a lot of ginger. There's a lot of mosses that sort of fill in some of the blank spots. And I really love that because they're like one of the very first things that are green out there. Spring ephemerals, Dutchman's breeches, squirrel corn, a lot of red trillium come up. We got a lot of geranium. Right now, it's very green, almost like that first picture, because we have a lot of bracken fern. So it sort of comes up later and sort of covers like a bunch of little umbrellas on there. Sweet Sicily is here, and here's some of the trilliums and geraniums in there. For some reason, there's just a random Joe Pye weed that came up somewhere. Sometimes I'm not sure if the things just made their way to my yard or if they just like came off on my shoes and pants because I work in nature preserve. So I may just have like Joe Pye weed seed on my shirt. This is a tiny, like he's like this big, hognose snake that I found in my yard the second year we were working on it. And then we just saw him again this year. So I'm hoping that he's just like a resident in the dune, that he's made his home in my yard, because some of the yards next to me, they don't look like this, you know. So this is Sarah's yard. Mine is very messy, very much the nature preserve sort of management style. Sarah lives in a you know, typical urban type area with moved into a house with a typical mowed lawn and fenced in backyard. So she started around the border of her yard, so around the fences and things like that, and just planting like you just would any other normal garden, but just using natives. Nowadays, she does get a lot of, she's had a lot of success. She likes to do big blocks of colors. So if you look at my background, that's our native garden at our office. And a lot of it is like that, like a big block of lupin, a big block of rudbeckia. And that's a great way to sort of blend that sort of native wildness with the sort of more manicured typical landscape look. So it's a lot less offensive to your neighbors if they're not used to this sort of native growing. But she's putting things in there and then just watching them grow. And it's taken a few years, but she's got this whole huge border around now. And then started working on some of the stuff in the front. She's got bloodroot and ginger and stuff just growing right out of her steps there. So I will also mention that in this very urban neighborhood, Sarah also has chickens. She's got a dog and a cat, and she was raising bees. I'm not sure if she's still got bees. So if you want to do honeybees, make sure that they're cool with your neighbors. Your bees need more than your yard. They have to go out and forage for a long way. So why get the sign? Bringing Nature Home is just one of many native plant recognition programs. But not only is it sort of tell people, hey, like my lawnmower is not broken. I'm actually doing this for a reason, right? Like, hey, I'm not crazy. This is a native garden. Don't spray it or mow it. It also it tells them a lot of other things. I see a lot of things where people will be like, oh, my neighbor's spraying mosquitoes, or True Green Chem Lawn accidentally pulled up to my lawn, right? It tells people like, please don't like cut this down, don't spray this, don't stomp on it, don't drive on it, right? This isn't just a weedy thing. I had a friend that lived very much in the country, and he just had like this native plant garden, like sort of along the road, and he was growing all these little prairie plants. And his neighbor came by and mowed it just because he thought he was doing him a favor. He's like, oh, I was just mowing your ditch for you, like totally innocent mistake, right? He wasn't trying to be a jerk or be like, mow your lawn. He was just like, I just thought I was helping you out. I was mowing my edge, so I mowed your edge too. And, he was heartbroken. Another really good reason is so that you tell other people you should do this too, right? So not only growing natives in your yard, but being an advocate for it. Hey, you can get one of these signs too. You can make habitat as well. Like my yard was just like your yard, it doesn't have to be grass. There's a lot of resources online. SaveDunes.org has a great resources page, and they have the guide to landscaping in the Indiana dune communities. And I think the link is in the chat if you want to sign up to get the pollinator guide early, but that's July 1st, I believe. The Indiana Native Plant Society has a wealth of resources about individual plant species, about invasive species, about what species you want to use for what reason, and just a great group to be a part of. The Wild Ones, Gibson Woods, there are a lot of organizations like that. The Wild Ones does a really great native plant sale, and they have a lot of great resources on their site. I'd like to thank you. All my sort of contact information is down there. I would like to mention that the Bringing Nature Home recognition program, if you would like one of those signs, you apply for it on our website at hinestrust.org/bringing nature home. And it's just a quick little application. It's going to ask you some questions and things. And then some people from Shirley Hines or from the Friends of Shirley Hines will come out and look at your garden just to make sure, you're not faking it, right? We don't want to just put a sign on anything. But it's also great to like learn about who's doing what and meet other cool people that are doing these native plantings, and a good way for you to show off your garden. And then we give you the sign, and we often recognize you at one of our events or one of our partnership meetings or something like that. So I highly encourage you to go check out Bringing Nature Home if you're in our region, and get signed on to one of those programs so you can be an advocate for nature. So thanks. Any questions or anything like that? Oh, I'll also mention that the sign is Barb Labus artwork. So just like those great pollinator guide images.
What a treat. Thank you so much, Eric. Gosh, that was really enriching presentation. And as somebody that is in love with the whole concept of native gardening, what I am always blown away by is how many more things I have to learn and how much more I want to learn. And each time I hear one of you speak and your presentation, wow, that was so wonderful. I'm overwhelmed oftentimes in my own garden on what it is I'm trying to accomplish. And I heard you say a number of times, start small, select a patch the size of a coffee table. I'm like, I can do that. That's achievable. This is totally doable.
Well, people often fall in love with like one species, right? A lot of people have gone down the native gardening path because they planted some milkweed, right? Or some spiderwort or some cool little native, and they were like, wow, this is just as beautiful as the stuff I can, buy in the garden center. And it gets very addictive. Eventually, you're like, that's all I want.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That was wonderful, Eric. Thank you so much for sharing those resources. I'm not sure, Katie, do we have any questions in the Facebook chat?
We do have one question. So David asked, how do you avoid a monoculture in your yard, Eric?
So, there's a lot of different ways to look at that, right? So a monoculture often refers to like agriculture, right? Like a monoculture of corn or something like that, or grass lawns is often a monoculture. But I would assume that he's talking about like if I plant milkweeds and it all becomes milkweeds. That's difficult. Choosing less aggressive plants, like I was saying, like letting some of those smaller, weedier plants be there first. Oftentimes those are annuals that you just, if you want to reduce them, you just need to clip them before they seed or pull them straight out of the ground. But I like to take the approach of sort of letting it act as though it's recovering from a disturbance. So letting those sort of weedy plants be there first, plugging in the plants you actually want. And as those plants start to grow a little bit more, thinning out the less desirable plants. So as long as they're all native, I don't really have a problem with them being a little weedy or less desirable, right? The biggest problem is when things seed, like avens, for example. It's got a great little flower. It's kind of a weedy native plant, but then when it seeds, it's got like the sticky seeds that stick on you. But that's just kind of how it moves around my yard too. So thinning things out while replacing them with other things. So if you've got a patch and it's just all milkweed and you don't want it to all be milkweed, you want to just kind of try and get rid of some of that by like cutting it or trying to dig some of it out, but putting something else there that's going to expand while you're sort of thinning out, that, if that makes sense. So if you just clear a space to try and get rid of that chunk of monoculture, it's a really good aggressive plant, so it's just going to fill that in again. But if you've got something else there, it's competing for the resources and water and soil and literally competing for space. So it's sort of holding its ground. So you got to do like a double-edged sword thing, right? Getting rid of something while adding something else at the same time.
That's great advice, Eric. Thank you. And how wonderful to have an opportunity to see your yard and your approach. I mean, that was just, your yard is so charming, and it looks like natural habitat. And how much more enjoyable is it to, I don't have to go to the park. I just go home.
I'm the type of
course you
person
want to
that
go to
there's
the park, but
right, that there's always this feeling of like, what do my neighbors think? Or when people come over, like, what do they think? But usually it's quite a positive experience, right? When somebody comes over, and I usually try to explain, oh, I didn't like not rake the leaves. I just like to leave that little leaf pile and then kind of show people like that kind of thing. Yeah, like it can feel a little bit like I'm going against the grain sometimes, or, I'm sort of a rebel or something like that. But the hours of enjoyment that it brings me, I mean, I kid you not, my wife is also an ecologist, so I'm very blessed that she's cool with it all too. But we probably come home like every day and spend just 5 minutes just looking at like what's blooming now and what came up in the yard and what's in the backyard right now and stuff. And we're always like, oh, come out here and see this. There's this cool moth, or, oh my God, like now this is blooming or something like that. So it just brings me tons and tons of joy.
That's marvelous. And it brings the wildlife joy too, and the plants. So it's that sacred bond connection. It's a two-way street.
Yes, I need them as much as they need me.
Yes, and we are thrilled to have been able to feature you during our Pollinator Week virtual program series. It's an honor to work with you, and always a learning experience. So thanks again. We do have more virtual programs coming up that are not to be missed. And so I'm going to pull up again very quickly So if you go to www.savedunes.org here and click on our news tab, the full schedule of presentations for the week is listed here. And so we just completed day 2 of 5 virtual programs. That was incredibly enriching. I'm so excited. You know, day 1, we unveiled our new guide. I can't wait for everyone to get a copy of that and learn more about it. On Wednesday, tomorrow, Desi Robertson will be here to talk about the native bee research at the Indiana Dunes National Park. And then Steve Sass and Amanda Smith is actually added to the roster. They will be talking about Lepidoptera projects they have going on at Indiana Nature, a wildly popular Facebook group, but also a website where they're doing these research projects that are just mind-blowing. Thursday, we've got Pollinator Art, Photography, and Culture with Susan Kurt, Joel Perez, and Barb Labus. This is not to be missed. This is not a typical presentation that you can access for free. I really hope people tune in for that. And then on Friday, boy, we're going to wrap it up with a look at how everything that you're doing in your yard, as Eric shared, is actually helping to increase connectivity for wildlife across our landscape. So remember that map that he showed where, you know, we've got our nature preserves dotted here, there, and everywhere, but in between are these large swaths of subdivisions, communities, you know, hospitals, shopping centers. Imagine if just a little patch of grass in each and every one of those was converted into a native planting. We would really be living in a utopia for native plants and wildlife. So please remember to sign up and receive a copy of your guide. Thanks again to our funders. And thanks for tuning in. And thank you to Katie and to Eric and to Carl. And we will see you tomorrow here on Facebook, 6 p.m.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.